She saw his betrayal, took off her ring, and disappeared. The billionaire CEO never expected what happened next. From nothing. That's where Vivienne Carver started. 7 years ago, she was writing algorithms in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, the kind of place where the radiator clanked through winter nights and the neighbors' arguments bled through paper-thin walls. She'd sit at a second-hand desk, laptop balanced on stacks of textbooks, dreaming of systems that would change the world. Today, her software runs the infrastructure of Fortune 500 companies. Her name appears on patents worth hundreds of millions. Her company, Carver Analytics, employs 60 people and operates out of a state-of-the-art facility in Brooklyn that she designed herself. But the man she married saw all of that as something else entirely. Julian Ashford, billionaire CEO, Stanford graduate, the kind of man whose smile appeared in Forbes and whose handshake closed 9-figure deals. He saw her success, her brilliance, her years of relentless work, and he saw an opportunity, a mark, an acquisition target. The morning Vivienne discovered what he'd done, she didn't scream. She didn't throw things or demand explanations. She stood in his home office, staring at encrypted files on his tablet, files containing forged patents and fake signatures, and a systematic plan to steal everything she'd built. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through document after document, each one worse than the last. Her coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, brown liquid spreading like a stain, like evidence of a wound that had been bleeding for months without her knowing. And then she did something Julian never expected. She walked upstairs to their bedroom where he still slept, oblivious. She twisted the platinum ring off her finger, the one he'd given her on top of the Empire State Building while tourists filmed and applauded. She placed it carefully on his desk, right next to the tablet containing his betrayal. No note, no explanation, no tears. And then Vivienne Carver disappeared. Julian assumed she'd come crawling back within hours, devastated, broken, ready to accept whatever story he spun about misunderstandings and surprises he'd been planning. He had no idea that the woman he'd married, the woman he thought he'd studied and cataloged and controlled, was someone entirely different than he'd imagined. He had no idea what she was capable of when she stopped playing the role he'd written for her. Because sometimes the quietest exits trigger the loudest avalanches, and Julian Ashford was about to feel every single fracture. The morning began like every other Thursday in their carefully constructed life. Vivienne woke at 5:30, the way she always did, in their penthouse on the Upper East Side. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame Manhattan like a painting, the city still dark, except for scattered lights in other towers, where ambitious people were already awake, already working, already fighting for their piece of the dream. She loved mornings in New York. There was something honest about the city before dawn, before everyone put on their masks and started performing. She'd come here 9 years ago from Detroit, with nothing but a mathematics degree from a state school nobody had heard of, a scholarship that barely covered rent, and a belief that if she was good enough, smart enough, relentless enough, she could build something that mattered. And she had. The kitchen gleamed in the pre-dawn darkness. Vivienne moved through it quietly, barefoot on heated Italian tile, starting the espresso machine Julian had imported from Milan. Everything in this penthouse whispered wealth. The custom walnut cabinets, the Sub-Zero refrigerator, the view that cost $12 million. She poured coffee into a mug she'd brought from her old life, a chipped ceramic thing she'd bought at a thrift store in Brooklyn when she first moved to the city. Julian hated that mug. He'd offered to throw it away a dozen times, replace it with something from the matching set his decorator had chosen. But Vivienne kept it. Some small part of her needed to remember where she'd started, who she'd been before all of this. Before him. Julian was still asleep upstairs. He'd come home late again, claimed he'd been in back-to-back calls with investors in Tokyo. That was happening more and more lately. The late nights, the weekend conferences, the emergency meetings that couldn't wait. Vivienne had noticed, of course. She noticed everything. It was what made her exceptional at what she did. The ability to see patterns others missed, to understand how systems revealed the truth about the people who built them. But she'd pushed her suspicions down, buried them under lines of code and client presentations, told herself that building empires required sacrifice from both of them. Her company had just won a contract with the Department of Defense, $300 million to develop predictive algorithms for cybersecurity threats. It was the kind of project that would cement her reputation forever, the culmination of 7 years of innovation and sleepless nights, and proving herself to people who'd assumed a black woman from Detroit couldn't possibly understand machine learning. Julian had been so supportive when she'd won the contract. He'd opened a bottle of champagne from his private collection, the kind that cost more than her first car. He'd reserved their favorite table at Per Se. He'd told her how extraordinary she was, how proud he was, how he'd always known she'd achieve something like this. She remembered the way his eyes had gleamed in the candlelight, the way he'd raised his glass to her brilliance. She should have recognized that gleam for what it was. Vivienne carried her coffee toward Julian's home office, intending to check their shared calendar before heading to her lab in Brooklyn. The office was his domain. All black leather and chrome and glass, degrees from Stanford in museum-quality frames, photos from Davos, from TED stages, from charity galas where he smiled next to senators and tech moguls. There was a vintage chess set on his desk, still in its original packaging, a gift from some mentor he liked to mention in interviews. Julian never actually played chess. He just liked how it looked. The tablet sat on his desk, screen still glowing. He must have forgotten to lock it before he'd come to bed. Vivienne glanced at it, intending to just turn it off, save the battery. But then she saw the notification. An alert from an encrypted server. She recognized the encryption protocol because she'd built it herself years ago, before she'd even met Julian. Her hand moved before her conscious mind could process what she was doing. She touched the screen, the alert opened, and Vivienne Carver's entire world began to fracture. The files were organized with the kind of precision legal teams demanded. Professional, methodical. She recognized her own work immediately, her AI architecture. The predictive algorithms she'd spent 3 years developing. The code that had won her the Defense Department contract. But as her eyes moved across the screen as she opened folder after folder, her coffee mug began to shake in her hand. The patents weren't in her name. Her code was there, her architecture, her innovation, but everywhere her digital signature should have appeared, she found something else. Expertly forged authentication keys, fake credentials, and beside them, in every document, in every field marked primary developer, she found his name, Julian Ashford. According to these files, he was the architect, the visionary, the genius who'd created the algorithms that would revolutionize cybersecurity. Vivienne Carver appeared only as a junior contributor, a talented assistant helping execute his vision. The mug slipped from her hand. It hit the floor and exploded, ceramic shards skittering across Italian marble, coffee spreading like something alive, like something bleeding. Her hands moved on their own, opening more files. Each one was worse than the last. Emails to the Department of Defense administrators, written from a fake account that perfectly mimicked hers, recommending Julian as the technical lead for the project. Financial records showing her company's research funding being quietly rerouted to offshore accounts she'd never seen before, never authorized. Legal documents drafted, but not yet filed, transferring majority ownership of Carver Analytics from her to Ashford Technologies. And then she found the final folder, the one labeled Transition Timeline. Inside were step-by-step instructions for how Julian would file the forged patents, how he'd convince the Defense Department that Vivienne was having a mental breakdown, that the stress of the project was too much, that she needed to step back for her own health, how he'd position himself as reluctantly taking over, the supportive husband saving his wife's company from her own instability. There was even a drafted press release. Julian Ashford, in an act of devotion, steps in to lead Carver Analytics after founder's health crisis. He'd planned everything, every detail, every lie. While she'd worked 90-hour weeks, while she'd poured every ounce of her intelligence into code that would protect critical infrastructure, while she'd trusted him with her ideas and her strategies and her vulnerabilities, Julian had been building a machine designed to erase her. Not just steal from her, erase her entirely. The office felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Vivienne's breath came in short, sharp gasps. 7 years of marriage. 9 years of building her company from nothing, all of it a con. A long game orchestrated by a man who'd studied her like she was a system to hack, who'd identified her weaknesses and exploited them with surgical precision. She thought about running upstairs, throwing the tablet at him, screaming until her throat bled, demanding answers she already knew he'd never give honestly. She could already hear his voice, smooth, calm, reasonable. "A misunderstanding, Vivienne. You're overreacting. Let me explain." But she didn't move toward the stairs. Instead, Vivienne pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady now. The shock had burned through her system, leaving something else in its place. Something cold. Something precise. She photographed every document, every forged signature, every fake email, every piece of evidence that proved Julian Ashford had spent months, maybe years, planning to steal everything she'd built. She worked methodically, clinically. The way she wrote code. No wasted motion, no emotion clouding her logic. When she was finished, when every file was documented and backed up to 3 separate encrypted servers Julian would never access, she stood in his office and let herself feel it. The full weight of the betrayal, the magnitude of what he'd tried to do. She thought about her father, about growing up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where dreams went to die, about watching her father work the Ford assembly line for 30 years before the plant closed and took his pension with it, about her mother cleaning houses, coming home with her knees aching and her hands raw, telling Vivienne that education was the only way out, the only weapon people like them had. Her father had told her something else, too. He'd said that people like them didn't get second chances, that every opportunity was a fight, that the world was full of people who'd smile while they robbed you blind. Vivienne had thought she'd escaped that world. She'd thought marrying Julian meant she'd finally arrive somewhere safe, somewhere she belonged. She'd been so grateful to him, so eager to prove herself worthy of his world, his family, his effortless confidence. The realization made her sick. She'd never needed to prove anything. Julian had been the one chasing her. She'd met him 3 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco, just after her company had won its first major contract. He'd approached her after her panel, introduced himself, asked intelligent questions about her work. He'd seemed genuinely interested, genuinely impressed. Now she saw it clearly. The timeline. Every major breakthrough in her career had corresponded with Julian's increasing involvement in her company. He'd encouraged her to walk him through her algorithms, to explain her development process, to introduce him to her government contacts. He'd played the supportive husband so perfectly, and she'd thought he was being loving. She'd been handing him the blueprint to steal everything. Vivienne walked upstairs, each step deliberate, controlled. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Julian sleep. He was sprawled across their bed, one arm flung over the space where she usually slept, his face peaceful in the gray dawn light. She studied him like he was a problem she needed to solve. Where had she missed the signs? What vulnerabilities had she overlooked? But there was nothing to solve. Some people were simply predators, and she'd been prey. She went to her closet. Not the walk-in filled with designer clothes Julian's stylist had chosen, the smaller closet where she kept her old things. She pulled out the duffel bag she'd carried to New York 9 years ago. It still smelled like her parents' house, like the life she'd tried so hard to leave behind. Vivienne packed quickly, passport, laptop, the external drives containing every line of code she'd ever written, the watch her father had given her when she'd gotten her first job, the photograph of her mother. Nothing Julian had bought her, nothing that connected her to this version of her life. The wedding ring sat on her finger, platinum band, diamond that had cost more than she'd made in her first year out of grad school. Julian had proposed on top of the Empire State Building. He'd arranged for a photographer, for champagne, for a small crowd of tourists to applaud when she'd said yes. She'd cried that day, overwhelmed by the romance of it, the fairy tale. Now she twisted the ring off her finger and felt only relief at its absence. She placed it on Julian's desk, right next to his tablet, right next to the evidence of his betrayal. No note, he'd understand. Vivienne pulled out her phone and called Kwame Chan. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello? It's me. I need you to do something. Right now. Don't ask questions." There was a pause. Then Kwame's voice came back, sharper now, awake. "Viv, what's wrong?" "Change every password. every access credential, server keys, GitHub repos, cloud storage, bank APIs, everything. Use the emergency protocols, the ones only you and I know. Jesus. Vivienne, what happened? Do it now, Kwame. Then call Rachel Okonkwo. Tell her I need to see her today. Not billable hours, cash payment. Tell her to bring someone who specializes in intellectual property theft, someone who handles corporate espionage. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Kwame's voice, quiet and furious. He did something. Julian did something. He tried to take everything, the company, the patents, everything. That bastard. Viv, where are you? I'm leaving. Change the passwords. Call Rachel. I'll explain everything later. She hung up before he could ask anything else. There would be time for explanations. Time for strategy. Right now, she needed distance. Vivienne loaded her bag into her car. Not the Bentley Julian had insisted she drive. The Tesla she'd bought herself 2 years ago. Modest. Practical. Hers. She drove out of Manhattan as the city woke around her, past the limestone buildings of the Upper East Side where people like Julian lived their curated lives, through the financial district where glass towers reached toward the sky like monuments to ambition, into Brooklyn where her lab sat, where 60 people would arrive in a few hours expecting her to lead them. She didn't stop. She kept driving, north, watching the city recede in her rearview mirror, watching the life she'd built disappear behind her. Her phone started buzzing. Julian was awake. He'd found the ring. The calls came rapid fire. 3, 5, 10. Then the texts started. Vivienne, where are you? This is childish. Come home so we can talk like adults. You're overreacting. Let me explain. You're going to regret this. She blocked his number without reading the rest. Every word he'd ever said to her was a lie. She wasn't interested in hearing more. By early afternoon, Vivienne was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She'd driven for 5 hours, stopping only once for gas and coffee. She checked into a boutique hotel near MIT under her mother's maiden name. The room was small but clean, anonymous, safe. She sat on the bed and opened her laptop. Around her, she spread printouts of every document she'd photographed, every forged patent, every fake email, every piece of Julian's systematic plan to erase her from her own company. And then, Vivienne Carver began to plan. Not her revenge. Revenge was inefficient, emotional, wasteful. She began to plan her resurrection. Because Julian had made one catastrophic miscalculation, he'd assumed that stealing everything from her would break her, that she'd crumble, that she'd accept whatever narrative he spun because fighting back would be too expensive, too public, too hard. He'd forgotten something fundamental about her. She'd started with nothing before. She knew how to build from zero. She knew how to be ruthless when necessary. She knew how to identify vulnerabilities and exploit them with precision. And unlike Julian, she was actually good at what she did. He'd studied her for years, learned her patterns, her weaknesses, her blind spots. But she'd studied him too. She'd watched him operate, seen how he built his empire on smoke and mirrors and other people's work. She'd just never realized she was gathering intelligence. Now she would use every piece of information she possessed. Vivienne pulled up Julian's background on her laptop. She'd never thought to look closely before. Why would she? He'd come with credentials from Stanford, a billion-dollar company, references from respected tech leaders. But now she looked deeper, past the surface, past the performance. The company existed, yes, but Julian's role there was far less impressive than he'd claimed. He wasn't the visionary founder. He was the third CEO, brought in after the actual innovators had sold their shares and moved on. His tenure had been marked by stagnation. No major innovations. No breakthrough products. Just maintenance of systems other people had built. The Stanford degree was real, but he'd graduated with mediocre grades. No honors. No research publications. No evidence of the genius he claimed to possess. The family wealth he'd always implied. His parents owned a small vineyard in Napa, comfortable, upper middle class. Nothing close to the dynasty he'd suggested. Everything about Julian Ashford was inflated, enhanced, carefully rendered to project an image of brilliance that didn't match reality. He's a fraud, Vivienne said aloud to the empty hotel room. He's always been a fraud. Her phone rang. Kwame. It's done. Everything's locked down. New passwords. New authentication protocols. I called Rachel. She can see you tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. She's bringing Marcus Webb. He specializes in corporate espionage and IP theft. Viv. What the hell happened? Vivienne took a breath. Julian's been planning to steal the company. For months. Maybe longer. Forged patents putting his name on my algorithms. Fake emails to the DoD recommending him as technical lead. Documents transferring ownership. He was going to file everything and then claim I was having a mental breakdown. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then Kwame's voice, shaking with fury. I'm going to kill him. No, you're going to help me destroy him legally. Completely. So thoroughly that he never does this to anyone else. Jesus, Viv, Riziz. He approached me 6 months ago. Took me to lunch. Said he wanted to surprise you for your anniversary. Asked questions about the company. About our development pipeline. About the DoD proposal. I thought he was being a good husband. It's not your fault. He's a professional. We were just his biggest score. But Kwame's words opened another door in Vivienne's understanding. 6 months ago, that was when she'd first started pitching to the Defense Department, when the contract had gone from possibility to probability. Julian hadn't just been planning this for months. He'd been planning it from the moment her success became inevitable. I need you to do something else, Vivienne said. Pull all our financial records, every transaction, every vendor payment, every expense. Look for anything irregular, anything that doesn't match our normal patterns. You think he's been stealing? I know he has. I just need to prove how much. They talked for another hour. Kwame took notes, asked questions, promised to have a complete financial audit ready by morning. When they finally hung up, Vivienne felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not grief, not even anger anymore. Clarity. She knew exactly what she needed to do. The steps were obvious, logical, inevitable. Document everything. Secure her assets. Build an airtight case. Go public. Let the weight of evidence crush Julian's lies into dust. And then rebuild, stronger than before, because she understood something now that she hadn't before. She'd been holding herself back, trying to be the wife Julian wanted, the partner who didn't threaten his ego, the woman who made herself smaller so he could feel bigger. That woman was gone. Vivienne stood and walked to the hotel window. Cambridge spread below her, MIT's campus, Harvard in the distance. Institutions that had trained some of the greatest minds in history. Places that valued actual brilliance, not performed genius. Her phone buzzed again. Not Julian this time, her mother. She answered. Baby, I've been calling. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. I'm in Cambridge. I left Julian. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then her mother's voice, fierce and proud. Thank God. I never liked him. Vivienne almost laughed. You never said anything. You loved him. Or you thought you did. What mother tells her daughter she's making a mistake when she's finally happy? Her mother paused. But I knew, baby. Something about him always felt wrong. Too smooth. Too interested in your work. Men who are actually secure don't need to constantly remind you how supportive they're being. It was true. Julian had made a performance of his support, as if he deserved credit for not actively sabotaging her. Real support was quiet, unconditional. It didn't come with expectations of access. He tried to steal everything, Mom. The company, the patents, my work, if I hadn't found the files. But you did find them, and now you're going to fight back. That's what we do, Vivienne. We don't let people take what's ours without a war. After they hung up, Vivienne felt steadier, grounded. Her mother was right. This was a war, and she'd been training for it her entire life without realizing it. Every algorithm she'd written, every system she'd debugged, every problem she'd solved, all of it had been preparation for this moment. Julian had assumed she was soft, naive, easy to manipulate. He'd mistaken her kindness for weakness, her trust for stupidity. He was about to learn the difference between someone who performs intelligence and someone who actually possesses it. Vivienne opened her laptop and began to work, not on code this time, on strategy. She created a document titled Julian Ashford Complete System Failure and began filling it with everything she knew about his vulnerabilities, his inflated credentials, his mediocre performance at his own company, his lack of actual technical knowledge. the financial irregularities she suspected Kwame would find, the other women he'd probably targeted before her. Because men like Julian didn't suddenly become predators. They'd been practicing, refining their techniques. And somewhere out there were other women who'd barely escaped. Women who'd stayed silent out of shame or fear or exhaustion. Vivienne was done being silent. She worked through the night. When dawn broke over Cambridge, she had a complete battle plan, every move mapped out, every contingency accounted for. At 9 a.m., she walked into Rachel Okonkwo's office. Rachel was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and formidable. Marcus Webb sat beside her, younger but equally intense. They listened as Vivienne laid out everything. The forged patents, the fake emails, the financial theft, the plan to have her declared mentally unfit. When she finished, Rachel and Marcus exchanged a look. "This is one of the most sophisticated fraud schemes I've seen," Marcus said. "He's been planning this for a long time." "But he made mistakes," Rachel added, "keeping the originals on his personal server. That shows intent, premeditation. And the forged signatures are good but not perfect. We can prove they're fake." "What about the Defense Department contract?" Vivienne asked. "It's still yours." Rachel's voice was firm. "The Pentagon has your legitimate credentials on file. I've already sent them a legal notice that someone may attempt to impersonate you. They're taking it very seriously. Fraud on this scale isn't just civil, it's criminal, federal." Vivienne felt something loosen in her chest. "Good." But Rachel leaned forward. "Vivienne, prosecuting him will be expensive, time-consuming, very public. Your name will be in every tech publication. Every rival firm will see your personal crisis played out in court filings. Every detail of your marriage will become public record. Are you prepared for that?" Vivienne looked at both of them. Yes. Because this wasn't just about punishing Julian. It was about making sure no other woman ever suffered what he'd planned for her. Men like him operated in darkness. They relied on their victims, shamed to keep them silent. Vivienne refused to be silent. Rachel nodded slowly. "Then we go to war." They spent the next 6 hours building the case. Rachel's team pulled financial records. Marcus analyzed the forged documents. Vivienne walked them through every technical detail, explaining exactly how her algorithms worked, why Julian could never have created them himself, how the digital signatures proved authorship. By late afternoon, they had enough evidence to bury Julian 10 times over. Rachel made a call to the FBI. Corporate fraud on this scale involved federal agencies. By evening, 2 agents arrived at the office. They listened to Vivienne's story, examined the evidence, asked detailed questions. When they left, one of them turned back. "Miss Carver, what he did to you, it's not the first time we've seen something like this. But it's the first time someone's been willing to fight back this hard. Thank you." After they were gone, Vivienne sat alone in Rachel's office. Outside, Cambridge was settling into evening. Lights coming on across the city. People heading home to their lives, their families, their carefully constructed realities. She thought about Julian, about whether he'd realized yet that she wasn't coming back, that this wasn't a tantrum or a cry for attention, that she'd actually left. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You're making a mistake. Come home, we can fix this." She deleted it without responding. There was nothing to fix, nothing to salvage. The marriage had been a lie from the beginning. Julian had never loved her. He'd acquired her. Like a company, like an asset. But assets could fight back. And Vivienne was just getting started. Part 2. 5 days in Cambridge. And Vivienne had transformed from devastated wife into something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. She'd taken over the corner suite at the Charles Hotel. The kind of room that overlooked Harvard Yard and came with enough space to spread out an entire operation. Her laptop sat open on the desk, surrounded by monitors Kwame had shipped overnight. Legal pads covered in her precise handwriting. Printouts of every document she'd extracted from Julian's server. This was her war room. Kwame had arrived the second day, refusing to leave her alone. He'd set up his own workstation on the other side of the suite, his fingers flying across keyboards, running forensic analysis on every financial transaction Carver Analytics had processed in the past 3 years. What he'd found made Vivienne's blood run cold. "Viv, you need to see this." She walked over to his monitor. Kwame pulled up a spreadsheet, highlighting transactions in red. Shell companies. He'd created fake vendor accounts. Small amounts, never enough to trigger our audits. But look at the total. The number at the bottom made her stomach turn. $217,000, siphoned over 3 years. "He's been stealing since 6 months after you got married," Kwame said quietly. Vivienne stared at the screen. She'd trusted Julian with access to company finances. He'd insisted it would be easier that way, claimed he could help her manage the business side while she focused on development. She thought he was being supportive. He'd been planning this from the beginning. "There's more," Kwame said. He pulled up another folder. "Encrypted communications. I found them on his cloud backup. He's been corresponding with competitors, offering them your algorithms, your proprietary code, in exchange for board positions." "Show me." Kwame opened the emails. Vivienne read them with clinical detachment. Julian had been shopping her work to 3 different tech companies, promising them access to her Defense Department algorithms in exchange for executive roles. He'd been preparing his exit strategy, a way to land on his feet after he'd destroyed her company and taken credit for her innovations. "He was going to sell my work," she said, after stealing it. "He was going to sell it." "Gets worse." Kwame's voice was tight. "Look at this." He opened another folder. This one was labeled Carver Acquisition Final Phase. Inside were documents that made everything else look like preparation. A complete timeline for how Julian would file the forged patents. How he'd approached the Defense Department claiming Vivienne was having a breakdown. How he'd position himself as the reluctant hero stepping in to save the project. But the worst document was buried at the bottom. "Medical documentation," Kwame said. "He's been keeping records, claiming you've had mood swings, paranoid episodes, erratic behavior. He was building a case to have you institutionalized." Vivienne read through the fabricated medical notes. Julian had documented incidents that never happened. Conversations with therapists she'd never seen. Prescriptions for medications she'd never taken. "He was going to have me committed," she said. "If you hadn't found the files when you did." Kwame's voice shook. "Viv, he was going to lock you away and take everything." The room felt too small. Vivienne walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, students walked across Harvard Yard. People living normal lives, pursuing dreams, building futures. Unaware that people like Julian existed in the world. Predators who wore expensive suits and smiled while they destroyed you. "He forgot something," Vivienne said. "What?" "I'm not actually unstable. I'm just extremely angry. And unlike him, I'm actually good at what I do." Her phone rang. "Rachel Okonkwo. The Defense Department wants to meet with you tomorrow, Washington. They've seen the evidence I sent them and they're furious. I'll be there." "There's something else." Rachel paused. "Julian's hired a crisis management firm. Very expensive, very aggressive. He's already started spreading a counter-narrative." "What's he saying?" "That you stole from the company, that you've had substance abuse problems, that the marriage fell apart because of your mental health issues. He's trying to poison the well before we can establish the truth." So it had begun. Julian's backup plan, the same strategy he probably used before, attack the victim. Make her seem unstable, unreliable, untrustworthy, destroy her credibility before she could destroy his. "Let him," Vivienne said. "I have cryptographic proof of everything. His lies won't survive forensic analysis." "This is going to get very ugly," Rachel warned. "The media will pick it up. Your entire life will be scrutinized. Every decision you've ever made will be questioned." "Good. I'd hate for him to think I was going easy on him." After the call ended, Vivienne stood alone in the hotel suite. Kwame had gone to get food. The room was silent except for the hum of computers, the soft click of hard drives processing data. She allowed herself one moment of grief. Not for Julian. She felt nothing for him now except a cold, distant contempt. But for the woman she'd been. The one who'd trusted too easily. Who'd confused charisma with character. who'd been so hungry for belonging that she'd ignored every warning sign. That woman was gone, deleted, overwritten with something harder and infinitely more precise. Vivienne pulled up her Defense Department algorithms on her laptop. The code she'd written was beautiful. Elegant recursive functions that anticipated cyber threats before they materialized. Systems that would protect critical infrastructure for decades. This was her legacy. Her contribution. Julian could never have created this. He didn't have the skill, the vision, the years of grinding work that went into understanding systems at this level. She zoomed in on a particular section of code, a function she'd never shared with anyone. Not even Kwame, a digital watermark embedded so subtly that only someone who knew where to look would find it. Her initials, VC. Woven into variable names and comment structures. Every program she'd ever written had one, her secret signature, her proof of authorship. Julian could forge authentication keys all he wanted, but he could never forge this, the undeniable evidence that this code came from her mind, her logic, her architecture. Tomorrow she'd fly to Washington, face the Pentagon, watch Julian's lies begin to crumble under the weight of evidence. But tonight, in the darkness of her hotel room, Vivienne allowed herself to imagine the moment Julian would realize he'd lost. The moment he'd understand that he'd catastrophically miscalculated, that the woman he'd underestimated was the architect of his complete destruction. She smiled, cold, satisfied, precise. The meeting at the Pentagon was everything Vivienne had hoped for, and nothing she'd expected. She'd flown to Washington that morning with Rachel and Marcus. They'd taken an early flight, arrived at the Department of Defense by 9 a.m. Security was intense. Multiple checkpoints, biometric scans, escorts through corridors that felt like they belonged in a different era. The conference room was smaller than she'd imagined. No windows. Just a long table and 6 people in military uniforms and civilian suits who looked like they'd seen every kind of betrayal humanity could devise. The woman at the head of the table introduced herself as Director Sarah Martinez. She was perhaps 50, with gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. Ms. Carver, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the evidence your attorney sent us. We've also conducted our own investigation into Mr. Ashford's claims about the project. Vivienne sat down, Rachel beside her, and we're very interested in how someone attempted to commit fraud against the United States government. Director Martinez's voice was ice. We don't take kindly to people forging federal contracts. Over the next 3 hours, Vivienne walked them through everything. The forged patents, the fake emails, the systematic plan to steal her company. She demonstrated how her algorithms worked, explained the technical details that proved Julian could never have created them himself. One of the military officers, a colonel named David Park, asked the most direct questions. Ms. Carver, in your professional opinion, does Julian Ashford possess the technical knowledge to develop these algorithms? No, Vivienne's voice was steady. He has a basic understanding of coding. But these systems require advanced mathematics, machine learning expertise, and years of practical experience. Julian has none of those things. Could he have hired someone to create them? Not without me knowing. I wrote every line of this code myself. It has my signature embedded throughout. Not just the authentication keys he forged. Actual stylistic markers. The way I structure functions. The way I comment. The specific optimization techniques I use. Any competent forensic analyst could prove authorship. Marcus stepped in. We've already had 3 independent experts examine the code. All 3 confirm that Ms. Carver is the original author. The forged documents are sophisticated, but they're still forgeries. Director Martinez leaned forward. Ms. Carver, we're going to prosecute this. Federal charges, fraud, identity theft, attempted theft of classified contract materials. Mr. Ashford is looking at significant prison time. Vivienne felt something release in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank us yet. The director's expression was grim. This is going to be a media circus. Your name will be everywhere. Every detail of your marriage will become public. Are you prepared for that? Yes. Why? One of the other officials, a woman whose nameplate read Dr. Ellen Foster, asked quietly, Why put yourself through this? You could take a settlement. Move on quietly. Vivienne looked at her directly. Because he'll do it again. To someone else. Someone who might not have the resources I have. Someone who might not discover the fraud in time. I'm fighting because I can. Because someone needs to. The room was silent for a moment. Then Director Martinez nodded. Then we're with you, all the way. They spent another 2 hours going over details, building the timeline, identifying every point where Julian had committed a prosecutable offense. By the time Vivienne left the Pentagon, the sun was setting over Washington. Rachel walked beside her toward their car. That went better than I expected. They believe me. Of course they believe you. You have evidence. Julian has lies. The math isn't complicated. But as they drove back to the airport, Rachel's expression grew serious. Vivienne. I got a call while we were in the meeting from a journalist, Sarah Chen. She works for the Financial Times. She's been investigating Julian for months. Why? Because you're not the first. The words hit Vivienne like a physical blow. What? Sarah's found 3 other women, all successful in their fields, all married to Julian at different times, all nearly destroyed by him. She wants to interview you, wants to tell all 4 stories together. Vivienne stared out the window at Washington sliding past. 3 others. She'd thought she was his masterpiece, his biggest score. But she was just the latest in a series. Who were they, she asked. A tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. He married her, convinced her to make him CFO of her startup, then tried to transfer ownership while she was traveling. She caught it just in time, divorced him, took a settlement, signed an NDA. And the others. A gallery owner in Paris. He infiltrated her business, started selling her artists, worked through his own contacts, tried to push her out of her own gallery. She fought back but eventually sold the gallery and moved to Berlin just to get away from him. And the third. A music producer in Berlin. Same pattern. Marriage. Access. Attempted theft. She discovered what he was doing and threatened to go public. He convinced her that doing so would destroy her reputation. She stayed silent, took a payout, disappeared from the industry. Vivienne felt sick. How many, she whispered, how many women has he done this to? These are just the ones Sarah found. There could be more. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Vivienne pulled out her phone. Give me Sarah's number. You want to talk to her. I want to stop him, completely, so he never does this to anyone else. Rachel handed over her phone. Vivienne dialed. Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. Her voice was crisp, professional. This is Sarah. This is Vivienne Carver. I understand you've been investigating my husband. Ex-husband, Sarah corrected gently, and yes. I've been following Julian Ashford for 2 years, ever since one of his previous victims came to me off the record. She was too scared to go public, but she thought someone should know. Tell me about them, the other women. Sarah did. She laid out the pattern in devastating detail. Julian targeted successful women. Women who'd built something valuable. He married them, gained access to their businesses, then systematically worked to steal everything while positioning himself as the hero and them as unstable. He's a professional, Sarah said. He's been doing this for at least a decade, probably longer. And he's gotten away with it because his victims stayed silent. They were ashamed, afraid, exhausted. He made them believe that fighting back would destroy them more than he already had. Not anymore, Vivienne said. I'm fighting back, and I'm doing it publicly. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Sarah's voice, filled with something like hope. Are you willing to go on record? Full interview, name, details, everything. Yes, on one condition. What? You contact the other women, tell them I'm speaking out, give them the choice to join me, no pressure. But let them know they're not alone anymore. I'll try. Sarah paused. Vivienne, what he did to you, it's not just fraud, it's a pattern of predation. If we can prove that, if we can show that he's been doing this for years, the legal case becomes stronger. And more importantly, we make sure no other woman ever falls into his trap. Then let's make sure everyone knows exactly what Julian Ashford is. They talked for another hour. Sarah asked detailed questions, followed threads, treated Vivienne's story with the seriousness it deserved. By the end, they had a plan. Sarah would write a comprehensive exposé, She'd contact the other victims, and if they agreed, she'd publish all 4 stories together, a pattern, a system. A decade of predation finally brought into the light. After the call ended, Vivian sat in the back of the car, watching Washington disappear behind them. Rachel was on her own phone, coordinating with Marcus, making plans, building strategy. Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, not hope exactly. Something steadier, clearer, purpose. The plane ride back to Boston was quiet. Vivian worked on her laptop, reviewing code, preparing for the media storm she knew was coming. Rachel slept, her briefcase full of legal documents pressed against her side like armor. When they landed, Kwame was waiting at the airport. He pulled Vivian into a hug. How'd it go? The Pentagon's prosecuting, federal charges, and there's more. She told him about the other women, about Sarah's investigation, about the pattern. Kwame's face went through several emotions: shock, fury, disgust, finally settling on grim determination. We're going to destroy him. We're going to make sure he never does this again, Vivian corrected. There's a difference. Back at the hotel, Vivian found a message waiting, from an unknown number. This is Claire Donovan. Sarah Chen gave me your contact. I was married to Julian 5 years ago. He tried to steal my company. I stayed silent because I was ashamed, because I thought it was my fault for trusting him. But if you're willing to fight, I'm willing to stand with you. Vivian read the message 3 times. Then she called the number. A woman answered. Her voice was cautious. Careful. Hello. Claire, this is Vivian Carver. Oh God, I wasn't sure you'd actually call. Thank you for reaching out. I know this isn't easy. Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. Easy. Nothing about Julian was ever easy. He made me feel crazy, made me doubt my own memories, my own intelligence. By the time I got away from him, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Vivian closed her eyes. I know exactly what you mean. They talked for an hour. Claire told her story. The charm offensive. The gradual infiltration. The moment she discovered Julian was transferring her startup's intellectual property to his own shell companies. The legal battle she'd fought in silence. The NDA she'd signed just to make it stop. I thought I was the only one, Claire said. I thought I'd just been stupid, naive. But you, the others, we're not stupid. He's just a really good predator. No, Vivian said firmly. We're not stupid. We're talented women who trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. The next day, Sarah called again. I've heard from all 3 women. They're all willing to go on record. We're going to publish next week. Vivian felt something settle in her chest. Good. There's going to be backlash, Sarah warned. Julian's crisis team is already planting stories, questioning your credibility, suggesting you're motivated by bitterness over a failed marriage. Let them. I have evidence. They have lies. The article published on a Tuesday morning. Vivian was in her hotel room when it went live. Sarah had titled it, "The Serial Entrepreneur Who Preyed on Success." The piece was devastating in its thoroughness. 4 women, 4 companies, 4 near-identical patterns of manipulation, infiltration, and attempted theft. Sarah had laid it all out with forensic precision. The fake credentials, the inflated resume, the systematic targeting of successful women. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Tech publications picked it up, mainstream media followed. Twitter exploded with reactions. Vivian's phone started ringing. Interview requests, speaking invitations, messages of support from women she'd never met who'd experienced similar betrayals. But the most important calls came from unexpected places. Ms. Carver, this is Amanda Winters. I'm the CEO of Quantum Systems. I read Sarah's article. I want to talk to you about a partnership. Another call. Vivian, David Park from the Pentagon. We've been contacted by 3 more women who say Julian targeted them. We're expanding the investigation. Another, this is Professor Sarah Williams from MIT. We'd like you to speak to our students about professional ethics and protecting your intellectual property. By the end of the day, Vivian had received calls from 5 major tech firms interested in partnerships, 8 universities wanting her to speak, 12 journalists requesting interviews, and 1 call from Julian's attorney. Ms. Carver, my client would like to discuss a settlement. Vivian almost laughed. No, I think you should reconsider. This is going to get very ugly for everyone involved. It's already ugly. Your client made it ugly when he decided to steal from me and 3 other women. When he forged federal documents. When he planned to have me institutionalized. So no settlement. Full prosecution. I want him in court. I want every lie exposed. I want everyone to know exactly what he is. She hung up before he could respond. Rachel called 5 minutes later. Julian's attorney just contacted me. They're panicking. Good, let them panic. His company's board just fired him. Apparently systematic fraud against one's spouse reflects poorly on corporate reputation. Vivienne felt a cold satisfaction. How's his crisis management team handling that? Not well. The narrative he was trying to build just collapsed. 4 women, a decade of predation, federal charges. He can't spin his way out of this. That night, Vivienne stood at her hotel window, watching Cambridge settle into darkness. Across the city, lights flickered on. People heading home. Living their lives, most of them unaware that people like Julian existed. That predators wore expensive suits and went to Stanford and smiled while they destroyed you. But now they knew. Now everyone knew. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. I saw the article, baby. I'm so proud of you. Not just for fighting back, for making sure he can't hurt anyone else. Vivienne typed back. I learned from the best. The trial was set for 3 months later, but the real reckoning happened much faster. Julian's assets were frozen pending investigation. His board seat revoked. His company issued a statement distancing themselves from him. His crisis management firm quietly dropped him as a client. The other tech companies he'd been negotiating with released statements condemning his actions. Several announced new policies around vetting executives and protecting intellectual property. And the women started coming forward, not just the 3 Sarah had found, others. Women who'd dated Julian briefly, who'd shared business ideas with him that later appeared in his pitches, who'd felt manipulated but couldn't prove it. One by one they told their stories, and the picture that emerged was of a man who'd spent his entire adult life using people, taking what they'd built, claiming it as his own. Vivienne returned to New York 2 weeks after the article published. She walked into her office in Brooklyn for the first time since leaving Julian. Her team was waiting. They applauded when she entered, not politely, not awkwardly, but with genuine, fierce pride. Kwame stepped forward. We're with you, all of us, whatever you need. Vivienne looked at the faces around her, people she'd hired, trained, built a company with, people who'd chosen to work for her because they believed in her vision. Thank you, she said. Now let's get back to work. We have a Defense Department contract to deliver. The applause turned to laughter, and just like that, Carver Analytics moved forward. The trial, when it finally happened, was almost anticlimactic. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, financial theft, attempted fraud against the federal government. Julian's attorneys tried everything. Character assassination, procedural delays, plea bargains. All of it failed. Vivienne testified for 2 days. Calm, factual, unshakable. She walked the jury through every document, every forged signature, every piece of Julian's systematic plan to erase her. The defense tried to paint her as vindictive, a woman scorned, but the evidence didn't care about narratives. Numbers didn't lie. Code didn't change its authorship because someone wanted it to. The other women testified too. Claire Donovan, Marie Beaumont, Petra Klein. Each of them telling their story. Each of them proof that Julian's actions weren't a one-time mistake, but a calculated pattern. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Vivienne wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She was in her office, reviewing designs for a new project, a cultural center in Dubai that would showcase her architecture on a global stage. Kwame called with the news. It's done. Guilty. Everything. Vivienne set down her pen. Good. Sentencing is in 6 weeks. Rachel thinks he's looking at 8 to 10 years. Federal prison. And there are more charges coming. From the other victims. He's going to be in court for years. Vivienne felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of completion. Like closing a file. Finishing a program. How are you feeling? Kwame asked. Free. For the first time in years. Actually free. That evening, Vivienne stood in her new apartment in Brooklyn. She'd left the Upper East Side, left the world Julian had tried to trap her in. This place was smaller, simpler, Hers. She pulled up her current projects on her laptop. The Defense Department contract was ahead of schedule. The Dubai Commission was progressing beautifully. She had 3 more projects in development: a museum in Berlin, a tech campus in Singapore, a government building in London. Every single one of them existed because of her talent, her work, her vision. Julian had tried to steal that, had spent years plotting to take credit for her brilliance, to erase her contributions, to replace her with himself. And he'd failed, completely, catastrophically. Not because Vivienne was special, not because she was unusually strong or resilient, but because she'd refused to let him rewrite her story, because she'd chosen truth over convenience, evidence over silence. Her phone rang. Sarah Chen. "Vivienne, I wanted you to know. The article won a journalism award, and we've heard from 6 more women, all of them targeting by Julian at various points, all of them willing to testify. 6 more. The pattern goes back at least 15 years, maybe longer, you stopping him. It's saved countless women from going through what you went through." Vivienne closed her eyes. That was the point. That was always the point. The sentencing hearing happened on a cold December morning. Vivienne attended this time. She wanted to see it, needed to. Julian stood before the judge looking diminished, smaller. The confident CEO was gone. In his place stood a man who'd finally run out of people to manipulate. The judge was a woman in her 60s. She'd read every document, heard every testimony. She looked at Julian with something close to contempt. "Mr. Ashford, you have spent at least 15 years targeting successful women, marrying them, gaining their trust, and then systematically working to steal everything they'd built. You forged federal documents. You committed financial fraud. You planned to have your wife institutionalized to cover your crimes." Julian's attorney tried to speak. The judge silenced him with a look. "The court has heard your excuses, your explanations, your attempts to shift blame. None of it changes what you did. None of it excuses the pattern of predation you've engaged in for over a decade." She paused, looking directly at Julian. "You saw brilliant women as opportunities, as resources to exploit. You never once considered them as human beings deserving of respect, of partnership, of the credit for their own work." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also make full restitution to all victims. The court is recommending that your case be studied as an example of corporate fraud and intimate partner financial abuse." 12 years. Vivienne felt nothing. No joy, no relief, just closure. Julian was led away. He looked back once. His eyes found hers across the courtroom. She saw bewilderment there. He still didn't understand. Still couldn't grasp why she'd fought back. Why she hadn't just accepted his theft as inevitable. Vivienne held his gaze for one moment. Then she turned and walked out of the courtroom, Rachel beside her, Kwame waiting in the hall. "It's over," Rachel said. "No," Vivienne replied, "it's just beginning." Because the story didn't end with Julian's sentencing. It began there. Vivienne became a speaker in demand. Universities invited her to talk about protecting intellectual property, about recognizing predatory behavior, about fighting back when someone tries to steal your work. She wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about the epidemic of talented women having their achievements stolen by the men closest to them. It went viral. Started a conversation that continued for months. She started a foundation, called it Carver Protection Initiative. Its mission was to provide legal support for women in tech whose work was being stolen. Free attorneys, forensic analysts, resources to fight back. The other women Julian had targeted became friends. Claire, Marie, Petra, the 6 others who'd come forward. They formed a support network, shared their stories, helped each other heal. And Vivienne's company thrived. Carver Analytics grew. New contracts, new innovations, new talent. A year after leaving Julian, Vivienne stood at a podium in Dubai. She was presenting her cultural center design to a room full of architects and engineers and government officials. The design was beautiful. Soaring glass structures that played with light and shadow. Spaces that would showcase art from across the Middle East. Her signature style, her vision. She spoke about inspiration, about how architecture should serve people. should elevate human experience, should last for generations. But she also spoke about something else. 5 years ago, someone tried to steal my work, tried to take credit for everything I'd built. He failed. Not because I'm special, but because I refused to let him rewrite my story. She paused, looking out at the audience. If someone is trying to take credit for your work, if someone is manipulating you, if someone is making you question your own brilliance, fight back, document everything, build your case, and refuse to be silent. The applause was thunderous. After the presentation, a young woman approached her, maybe 25, brilliant eyes, nervous energy. "Miss Carver, thank you. My business partner has been taking credit for my designs. I was gonna just let it go, but hearing you speak, I'm gonna fight." Vivienne pulled a card from her pocket. "Call this number. It's my foundation. They'll help you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." That night, Vivienne stood on her hotel balcony, overlooking Dubai. The city glittered like a promise, like proof that vision could become reality. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. "I saw your speech, baby. Your father would be so proud." Vivienne smiled. "I hope so. He always said you were going to change the world. Looks like he was right." After they hung up, Vivienne pulled up her current projects. Dubai, Singapore, Berlin, London, 3 more in development, each one a testament to what she could build, what she had built. Julian was in prison, his reputation destroyed, his freedom gone, his name synonymous with fraud and predation. And Vivienne Carver was free, building, creating, helping other women fight back against the Julian Ashfords of the world. She thought about that morning, the coffee mug shattering, the ring on the desk, the quiet exit that had started everything. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was excellence. It was integrity. It was refusing to let anyone diminish you. It was standing in Dubai a year later, presenting designs that would outlast everyone in that courtroom, that would stand for decades. With her signature hidden in every structure, her proof of authorship woven into steel and glass. Julian had tried to erase her. Instead, he'd made her stronger, more visible, more determined. And Vivienne Carver, the girl from Detroit who'd come to New York with nothing but talent and determination, was just getting started. The best buildings, she'd learned, were the ones that survived earthquakes. And she was still standing,